I can have a seat. Those words that we just sang, even in your suffering, you saw to the other side. Seeing Jesus is something that carries us through. Scripture says that faith is the certainty of things that aren't seen. It's seeing something that you can't see when you can't see it. I don't know if you've ever lost sight of something or lost sight of someone. I remember a few years back, one of the things that we like to do is go camping. And if you've ever been in like one of the state park campgrounds, there's a lot of loops, and they all look the same, you know? So we get there, and I'm trying to set up our pop-up camper and everything, and we always do. We give our kids really clear boundaries, and we say something like, I need to be able to see you. You need to be able to see us. And so we'll say, just go around this one loop, you know? Well, again, all the loops look the same. So this was several years ago. I mean, my kids, Josh and Nora, they're 11 and 9 right now. So, you know, a few years back, they're a little bit younger. They get confused, and, oh, man, 5-6 minutes go by. I mean, the loop's not that big. I should see you every couple minutes coming around, you know. And a couple minutes go by, and I look at Gwen, and I'm like, have you seen the kids? She's like, no, I haven't. Have you? And so you know that moment, right? If you're a parent, panic sets in. And usually, you know, you look, you're like, oh, good. Not this time. No, I mean, it got scary. We're looking around, and you start to look and question and doubt, like every single tent, every single campsite, reaching out to the ranger, and you're seeing we're seeing the pickup trucks of the park rangers go all around, you know, and there's just something weird and eerie about knowing what they're doing and who they're looking for. It's scary, and it's confusing, and it's frustrating. You're mad at yourself. You're like, how could this happen, right? And there's something just terrifying about losing sight of someone or something. And maybe some of us are in that spot where you've lost sight of Jesus. You've lost sight of what matters. Or maybe you're in a spot where you just don't see him clearly. You're trying to follow, but you don't know. You don't know where this is going or what to do next. I remember another time when I was camping, this time on my own. And I was in the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, and I get impulsive. I do. Like, it's a beautiful thing, but it's also, I'm usually very, very planned. But I can get to this place of health where I'm like, let's have fun. Let's do something crazy and impulsive. And so I had brought all my backpacking equipment with me on this trip, and I got outside, and I'm like, you know what? It would be so much better to not have to carry all this stuff, you know? Yeah, some of you are laughing already, because that was a very silly thought. I'm like, I'm just going to go out there and sleep under the stars. Yeah, that's going to be beautiful and awesome. Well, when you're on the shores of Lake Superior, some things can change quickly. It was a really nice day, and by the time that the night came, I was laying in my hammock, and I'm looking up at the stars, only I couldn't see any of the stars because the rain clouds had come in. And it started getting very, very dark and very cloudy. You can't even see the moon or anything, and it starts pouring, and there's lightning, and I decided, you know what would be better than this? Going back to the car. That sounds good. So at this point, thankfully, I mean, I'm 3-4 miles in. It's within an hour or two. So I pack up my little amount of stuff and I go back. But man, I'm trying to go as fast as I can. This is intense, but some of these trails can be, I mean, I've gotten lost in the daytime, you know? So you're looking around and I don't know where the next flare is. You're trying to find your way. But when it's dark, it makes it that much more difficult. It makes it that much more scary. Trying to get out of the woods of life when you don't know exactly where you're going, when you can't actually see. We all know this in our lives. We know what it's like to be kept in the dark or to lose sight of something, but the same thing happens in our spiritual lives. Sin, shame, even our own perspectives can actually act like a veil. That's what this message is called, is lifting the veil, like a veil that's over our eyes that keeps us from seeing Jesus in our everyday life, in our everyday actions. We don't see God for who he is. We don't see ourselves the way that he sees us, freed, loved, forgiven. Here's the good news, and this is what we want to focus on over the next several weeks. Jesus came to lift the veil. Wherever it is, no matter the reason, when we can't see Jesus, we want our prayer to be, Jesus, help me to see you, no matter what's going on. So today, as we start this series, I want to ask you a question. What's blocking your vision? What's blocking your vision today? What's keeping you from seeing him? We've already said this verse a few times today, but in Matthew chapter 17, verse 8, Jesus invites his disciples to go up on a mountain with him, and they see him in a whole new light. They've been following him. They've been watching him. They've been drawing some conclusions about who he is and what life looks like when you follow him. But they go up on this mountain, and it's like a veil is removed, and suddenly they see Jesus. It's called the transfiguration. It's like his figure is actually changed, and he shines forth just gloriously. And in that moment, everything changes. They see him for who he really is. And they go, wow, I want to stay here forever. There was a cloud that came down, clouding their vision. But when it lifted, this is what Matthew 17:8 says. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus alone. As I was sitting right here praying this morning, that's my prayer. My vision gets so clouded. I see all of you. I see all of my problems. I see a black or a red number at the bottom of my bank account. I see the things that my past. I see the problems in the future. And as I was sitting here praying, I was saying, Lord, I want to see Jesus today. I want to see Jesus and Jesus alone. That's how it's supposed to be. But that's often not what we see. We went all the way back to the Old Testament in Exodus 34. Many of you have probably heard of a guy named Moses. And Moses did the same thing. He was leading the Israelite people out of slavery into freedom. And Moses, this is like the fullness of who he is. And it's so bright, it's so intense that when Moses comes back down the mountain, his face is actually shining, like physically shining. And it's so intense and so powerful that everyone that saw it said, we can't look at it. We're afraid to look at this. So Moses puts a veil over his face to cover. It's like the original Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, like cover that up. Just cover that thing up. Moses and Rudolph, look for the similarities, okay? Exodus 34, though. Moses comes down the mountain with a glowing face. The people are afraid. So Moses covers his face with a veil. And then we fast forward to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. And this is where we're going to spend a lot of time today. So if you brought your Bible, turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. If not, you follow along on Church Center or on the screens right here. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12 to 16, it says, since we have such a hope, we're very bold, not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to an end. But their minds were hardened. We'll come back to that. Their minds were hardened. For to this day, when they read the Old Covenant, is talking about people that would read the Old Testament and not see Jesus in it. He's saying it's like they have a veil over their eyes. They can't see what or who is actually there, and that keeps everything from changing. You're left with empty, dead religion and laws and rules. But when you see Jesus, everything changes. It says we're not supposed to live life under a veil. We're supposed to see Jesus fully. He goes on in verse 16. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. When we turn to Jesus, it's like the veil gets lifted. And suddenly we can see again. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and when the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So when we see Jesus, there's freedom. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. So step by step, as we look at Jesus, as we see Jesus, we start to become like Jesus. Not all at once, but little by little, one glory to another. Just daily turning and turning again. It's not a one-time thing, it's a daily thing. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. If you talk to people that know me and hear me talk, I mean, if you only heard the things that go on in my mind, I'm not that unlike you. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm probably worse. You're probably better people than me. But when I look at me, I don't know what you see. I see often failures. I see regrets. I see fears, the opinions of others, just on a weekly basis. There's times when I come in here and it's just all I can see is the problem in front of me. And I see everything but Jesus. It's not a fun way to live. It's exhausting. It's stressful. It's anxiety producing. It divides us and God. It puts distance between us and our closest relationships, because when all we can see are these things, we don't see Jesus. We don't see Jesus. I see all these other things. And when our vision is off, our identity is off. We start believing lies. I'm not enough. I'm too broken. I'll never change. Some of the things that run through my mind, if I told you, you would say, that's ridiculous, Dave. It seems so real to me. It's all I can see sometimes. Nobody cares about you. You're all alone. You don't have any friends. No one likes you. You're a failure. What are you doing? Why don't you quit? I hear it every day, and it becomes all I can see, which is more, sometimes those things are the very reasons that I don't want to turn to Jesus. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. But when I turn to Jesus, he lifts the veil. He lifts the veil. Could it be that most of us are walking through life half blind, unable to see, held back by fear, by shame, by distractions, when God is inviting us to see him and ourselves in light of him clearly? Clearly, here's the good news. Jesus came to lift the veil, to help us see clearly. And when we see him, everything changes. Let's do a call and response here for this, all right? So I'm going to say, when we see him, and you say, everything changes. Sound good? Wake up. All right. When we see him, everything changes. Come on. You don't even have to do it twice. You believe it. That's good. That's good. You'll never see clearly, though, until the veil is lifted. I promise you. This is not, religion is not a self-help project. It's not, I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to be good enough. You will never see clearly until you see Jesus. You'll never see yourself clearly, your relationship clearly, your situation clearly. Nothing. You'll never see clearly until the veil is lifted. If we don't recognize the veil over our hearts, we keep living with distorted identity. And that shapes everything that we think, everything we feel, everything that we do. We'll keep walking around in shame. We'll believe that we're failures. We'll let our past define us. Jesus lifts the veil so that we can see ourselves the way that God sees us. Freed, loved, forgiven. That makes all the difference. There's the first point I want to make today. Living under the veil distorts your vision. Living under the veil distorts your vision. If we go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12. Moses put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to an end. Their minds were hardened. For to this day, when they read the old covenant, that same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ is it taken away. It's like there's this veil, and it keeps us from seeing. You're looking through a screen. You're looking through a funhouse mirror or something. Have you ever done that, by the way? Have you ever gone into one of those quote-unquote fun houses? Things that make claims about, this is a fun house. I'm like, I doubt that. You liar. You liar. You know, it has to make claims about it or itself, calling itself a fun house when it's really, really not. All right? So sometimes we go into the fun house, and I don't know do we actually have a few of the images that I took? These are a lot of fun. Okay? When you look at yourself through an image, all right, and these are a few years old, actually, when apparently I had nothing better to do in these days than to sit here and take these kind of pictures, all right? This is me. It is, believe it or not, and yet through a certain lens, your image will be distorted. And some of us look at that lens, look at that mirror every single day. And this is what we actually see. I mean, let me tell you, if I looked at this in the mirror every single day, I would not feel good about myself. I have enough trouble as it is, you know? You look at that and you're like, my gosh, do I need a nose job, you know? You save up all your money and you go to the doctor and you get some work done when that wasn't even true to begin with. It's because of the veil, this distorted image that you've been looking at yourself and your situation through. And it causes you to believe things about yourself that are not true and act out of those beliefs. When the veil isn't lifted, it distorts our vision. We're blinded by shame, sin, religious performance, right? It's like we're the horses on Mackinac Island with blinders on so that all we can see is straight ahead. This is it when there's a whole world all around us, just waiting to be seen and lived in. There's true freedom available. One of these veils, though, that just is so prominent, so prevalent, is shame. We don't usually think about shame as a veil, but shame has to do with basing our identity on the things that we either have done in the past or are doing in the present. It's behavior-oriented. We look at ourselves not through the lens of Jesus and his love. We look at ourselves based on our accomplishments or our mistakes. We start to feel shame. Shame will always lead us to cover up, to try desperately to keep something hidden from others, from ourselves even. We'll believe lies and you're like, no, that's not true. It's actually them. I'm the victim here. There's shame that can cover us. And anytime we have a veil, a covering, it keeps things in the dark and it keeps our vision distorted. We end up feeling unworthy. We hide from God, actually. Not only do we distance ourselves from others, we'll hide from God. That's what Adam and Eve did in the garden at the beginning. They had sinned, and they knew it. And so instead of turning to Jesus to help them see, they ran and they hid and they covered themselves up. And they stayed in darkness until Jesus found them. Jesus is the one that lifts the veil. 2 Corinthians 3:16 says, when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. I wonder how long, honestly, how long did it take Adam and Eve? How long were they in hiding? How hard did they work to try to cover up their own shame? How exhausted were they? How tired were they? How stressed out about being found out were they? But when they turned to the Lord, they had all these fears, all these lies about what's going to happen, when the truth is, Jesus covers them in love. He covers them in love. There was consequences, but Jesus covered them in love. When one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. And there's freedom. You don't have to live in hiding anymore. You don't have to live in shame. You can live free. You're free to relate again. You're free to love Jesus again, to follow him wherever. You don't have to be confined to this little box of your own shame. And it's not a one-time thing. We just keep on turning. What you see shapes who you will be. If all you ever look at is your mistakes, that will shape your future. If all you ever look at is your shortcomings, if all you ever look at is what other people say about you, Dave, that will shape who you are. It will shape who you become. It'll shape your actions. It'll shape how much of yourself you put out there. I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to live in hiding. I don't want to live in shame. I want to turn to Jesus, and I want to keep on doing it every single day, because what I see will shape who I will be. Let me ask you this. Where do you feel stuck today? Where do you feel stuck? Where are you believing something about yourself that doesn't line up with what God says? What false reflection, what distorted image do you have that you have been staring at every day? A number, a person, a statement, a past experience. Replace the lies with God's truth. You're loved. You're chosen. You're forgiven. It's the truth. Part of seeing ourselves the way God sees us is looking at ourselves through the lens of Scripture. He's told us who he is and who we are. Read the book of Ephesians. Go into Romans, which is what we'll be doing in the Daily Focus every single day throughout the entire Lent season. We're going and we're saying, who am I? Not because I want to think nice things about myself, but because it's true, because that's what Jesus says. That's the key. 2 Corinthians 3:16 says that when we turn to Jesus, the veil is removed, and he doesn't just give us better self-esteem. He gives us a new identity, okay? Many of the things that you and I believe about ourselves are not true. It's not just that we don't want to dwell on them. We want to think happy, positive thoughts instead. Only positive vibes around here. They're not true. Think about the things that are true. And if there's repentance that needs to happen, repent. Turn to Jesus. That's what repentance actually means. It means turning to Jesus so that you can see again. We're living and walking in darkness. We turn to him and we can see what's true. That's actually what baptism is. You might have seen the slide that says there's baptisms happening April 27th. If you haven't done that before, or maybe some of us have done that. Our parents did that when we were children or a baby, and that was great. And now you want to say, I want to turn to Jesus for me. I want to receive this new identity in Jesus. When we go under the water, it's like the old me dying with Jesus, and a new identity emerges from that place. That's why we do baptisms. Some of us have already done that, though. We've turned, and we need to keep on turning every single day. That's why we do things like the daily focus. It is the most important. It's not because I write it or anything like that. Don't do the daily focus. Do something else. Find a way to turn to Jesus every single day. I find that it's easier when I don't have to plan it myself. Like, all right, it's already planned. I wake up, I do it. I wake up, I do it. Okay? I want to make my life easy. I want to get into a place where it's easy for me to turn to Jesus. It starts with seeing Jesus. So many of us will go on a self-discovery retreat or something like that. We just want to take a look inside. I don't want to take a look inside. I want to take a look at Jesus and have him show me what's inside. Okay? That's the truth. All right. Because when we find Jesus, we find ourselves. Jesus will lift the veil. Jesus reveals the truth. Luke chapter 9. This is actually where we find this story that we've been sharing. Luke 9, verse 28 to 33. It says this. Now about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter and John and James, and Jesus went on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. Behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep. By the way, if you're spending time with Jesus and you feel heavy with sleep, they're a little sleepy, okay? Here in front of their eyes, Moses and Elijah have appeared. It is very bright outside, okay? It's very bright. They do not have room darkening shades, and yet they're feeling a little sleepy, okay? They're a little sleepy. We need to wake up, right? Wake up to what's going on right in front of you. Today, wake up. Now, Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory. When you wake up, how many of us are just walking through life, half asleep, half dead, blinders on, another day? Honestly, we do highs and lows in our house every single day. This is to my shame, I will share this. But it's just so that you can see how absolutely normal or subnormal I can be, all right? The high that I shared with my family, I kid you not, the other day, from my day, which admittedly was bad, was the fact that I got to saw my dog go outside and take a dump. I actually said this to my kids. Ask Gwen afterwards if this is true. And I'm looking back and I'm like, Dave, why? Why do you share it from stage? I don't know. But that's what I said. That's all I can see. The only place that I could see God, I was so asleep to God's presence and activity in my life that in that moment where I could say to my family everything that God is and everything that God did, I said, well, Charlie went outside today. Come on. What did I miss? I mean, that's the thing. How sad for me. How sad for them that they don't get to see God's goodness because I'm so focused on literal poop. Literal. That was not in the notes. Okay. Where were we? Luke 9? As the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it's good that we're here. Okay, they wake up and they're like, yes. Got to church on Sunday. Man, that was good. I'm feeling good now. Peter's like, it's good that we're here. I see you now, Jesus. This is a good place. I'm feeling good. Okay? Let us make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. As he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. Now they can't see Jesus again. A voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. That Matthew says, and when the voice had spoken, they looked up and they saw Jesus alone. They kept silent and told no one what they had seen in this. They're with him all the time. Some of us, maybe you've been following Jesus for a long time. You're with him all the time. You haven't really seen him. You're not seeing him regularly. You're sleepy. You're distracted. The disciples were amazed, but when the cloud lifted, they saw only Jesus. No distractions, no confusion, just Jesus. Our world is loud. We're just talking about this with Mateo the other day. It's our next gen pastor, and we're talking about, the amount of time that messages can take. Some of you are like, yes. I hope he was really giving you a talking to, Dave. We're talking about that, and we just shared this is 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes. But how many minutes are in a week? I mean, hopefully this is 35 to 40 minutes of God speaking into your life amidst a very loud, very noisy, very consistent. It's like the banging of a drum. It just keeps stopping every day, every moment. We hear the lies. We're beaten down. We're discouraged. We're hopeless. Our world is loud. It's noisy. Our schedules are full. Our mind is racing. Anybody else lay down for sleep and it's like it doesn't stop there either. It just keeps going. But when we slow down, when we remove the distractions, we see Jesus. You ever been so distracted on your phone, you miss what was happening around you, right? You trip over something and look like a fool. What? You're distracted. I've been there. You're looking down when your kids scored a goal. Or they're riding their bike, you tuned out a conversation. Sometimes I'll do that with Gwen. She's talking. I'll literally have to say, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. Okay? And she's usually very gracious about that. But she's like, hey, I'm tuned out. We need to stop. These things keep us in the dark. They keep us from seeing Jesus. Are we able to stop? Slow down, pause. That's what something like a daily, I just want to refocus on you. I want to see Jesus. Because when we see Jesus, everything changes. That's why we're doing this 21 days of prayer. We want to get to a place where we just slow down and we create space every single day. If you need some help, there's some help. You can download the guide on Church Center. All we want to do, though, is create some space. We're removing something. The first week, we're going to say, hey, what if we removed some media that's taking up some space, making some noise in our life? Maybe it's a podcast, a TV show. Maybe it's all of it. Maybe instead of listening to the radio in the car, you turn it off. Just create some space to see Jesus, to hear from him. Then week 2, we're going to encourage everybody to go after some sort of food. It's amazing what happens when we're not filling our lives with this crutch. That's what it is for a lot of us. You know what? Anytime I've ever fasted, we just did a 3-day fast. I find that I'm more bored than hungry. Anybody else? It's like I just it's not that I'm hungry. I just want to eat. I just want to. And we find that we've crammed our schedules and our lives with other things than Jesus. So it's turning away from one thing to turn towards Jesus and say, I want to see you more. I want to lift the veil here. And the breakthrough that happens in areas that you wouldn't even imagine is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And then we're going to fill it with prayer. Week 3, we're just going to encourage everybody, take an hour. Just go after Jesus in prayer. Say, we want to see you. We want to see you. But it's not just about seeing him. We can get into these places where it's like, all right, Sunday, my morning quiet time, or whatever it is, I saw Jesus. Yay, I feel good. But look at Luke 9:34-35. What the voice says from the heavens is, all right, you see Jesus, and God says, this is my son. Listen to him. Listen to him. It's one thing to hear God's voice. It's another to listen to it, right? It says, listen to him. When you create the space, when you see Jesus, you need to listen to Jesus. This is what Romans chapter 1 says in verse 18 to 23. So find it. Starting in verse 18, says that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. He sees it all. He sees it all. He knows it all. And yet, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He loves us in it. The wrath of God is just, he sees it, and it makes him angry. The brokenness of our lives, of our world because of it. He sees the results of sin, the consequences, and it angers him because he's good and loving. Who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. We see it. We see the truth. We see Jesus. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. So many times like, oh, I didn't know. Yeah, you did. You did know. There was a voice. There was that small voice that's saying, you know where this is going. You know why you're doing this. But we don't pay attention to it, even though it's clear. We see it. Although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. What follows is a list of the outcomes, the literal outcome, the coming out of a darkened mind that leads to a darkened heart that leads to dark actions. Everyone in the world would agree there are problems, that this world is a dark, broken place. And we can all point to things as evidence. Why did this happen? How could a loving God allow this or that? And what it is we're simply agreeing. There is something that is good and there is something that is bad. There's goodness and there's evil. There's light and there's darkness, and we all see the darkness. This tells us where it comes from. The place that it comes from is right inside of here. And it starts in here. When I accept dark thoughts, broken thoughts, when I don't see Jesus, I turn away from him and I can't see him anymore, I start hearing other voices. Not literal, but I start listening to all the voices, all the noise around me. And I start to believe them. Because the further away I go, the harder it is to see and hear Jesus. But when I turn, it's like he's always right there. He's always right there. Dark thoughts tend to just like trickle down into our heart. It's like marinates in it. In the same way that a steak just marinates in it, it just soaks it up. Our heart soaks up our thoughts. That's why it's so important. That's why it's important to do this little work up in here. I'll tell you a very silly example. The other day, last week, me and Mateo were not here. We were in Seattle for a conference, and I was trying to coordinate our ride to get there. I was like, hey, man, if Gwen picks us up, can you do the ride? And he said, well, Tony usually drives me. And in that moment, I got mad at Mateo. I did. I asked him if I could share this. I got mad, and I said, man, that guy just only thinks of himself. I really did. See, here I am trying to coordinate a ride, and he's already got one. Thanks a lot. Thankfully, I shared that with Gwen. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get there. Mateo's already got his ride. This is what a baby I can be. And she's like, I think you're misreading that. Side note, you're probably misreading most of your texts, okay? I think you're misreading that. I'm like, I don't think so. She's like, you're stubborn. I said, yeah, well, whatever. I talked to him the next day. It's exactly, he's like, well, Tony usually drives me. Do you want to ride? But here's like there's this small work. It seems like nothing. But we believe it, right? If I believe that guy only thinks of himself, that drives a wedge in, doesn't it? Now it affects our relationship. And when things are left festering relationally, they just grow. And that it becomes magnetic in our hearts. And it starts attracting more and more. And now every time I have a misunderstanding, instead of grace, I go, see, there it is again. And their distance grows. And when you have unforgiveness and distance and division between us, that actually impacts our relationship with God too. So we start feeling further and further from God. We start feeling angry and alone, right? Turn to Jesus. Turn to Jesus. A darkened mind leads to darkness of the heart, leads to dark actions, leads to a dark world. If we keep the veil on, we stay in the dark. You don't know what to do in life? You're wondering about a decision? Lift the veil. Don't exchange the truth for a lie. Exchange the lie for the truth. And maybe that means tending your heart. That's just a way that we say, hey, we want to pause long enough to not just act out of hurt or offense or misunderstanding. And in that way, now what was sin against us becomes sin by us. Because now I go like, man, that guy, man, now I start sinning. I don't want to partner with sin. I want to take care of it. So I forgive. I just recognize what's really going on here. I renounce the lie. And I can reject it. Now I can receive the truth. I turn to Jesus and go, man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I went to that place. Help me see what you see, Jesus. Help me to see that person the way that you see them. And then everything changes. Because when I see Jesus, everything changes. The more we focus on Jesus, the more we see everything else differently. Our struggles, our failures, our identity. When we fix our eyes on Jesus, everything else fades. Our past, our failures, our fears, and we're transformed into his image. So what would change in your life today? If you saw yourself the way God sees you, not as a failure, but forgiven. Not as damaged, but as redeemed. Not as worthless, but deeply loved. Jesus lifts the veil so we can see ourselves the way God sees us. Free, forgiven, loved. So I just want to take a moment to reflect as we head into these closing moments. Where has shame, guilt, fear, distraction, sin distorted your vision? When you get that thing in mind, ask God, would you lift the veil? Would you help me to see Jesus clearly? And if you're carrying shame today, if you're believing lies about your identity, just bring them to Jesus. Part of turning to Jesus means bringing them to Jesus today in prayer. We've got a team to help you do that because he's already removed the veil. And he's waiting to lift it in your life as well.